There is a small city on the southwestern tip of Japan's main island, where the mountains fall into the sea and the coal mines once ran so deep they stretched beneath the ocean floor. The city is called Ube in Yamaguchi Prefecture, and in 1949 it was a working-class place, industrial, utilitarian, the kind of city that generates labor rather than legends. In May of that year, a tailor named Hitoshi Yanai opened a men's clothing shop on the ground floor of his family home. The shop was small, the street was ordinary. Viewed from outside, the ambitions looked proportionate to both. A month after the shop opened, Hitoshi's wife gave birth to their son. That son would, eventually, become the richest person in Japan. That son grew up inside the business. Not metaphorically, literally inside it, in the rooms directly above the shop floor, spending his childhood watching his father work. He watched Hitoshi measure and cut and press. He watched the customers come in, the salaryman needing a new suit for a promotion interview, the father buying his teenage son's first adult jacket, the retiree stretching a modest budget across something he intended to wear for a decade or more. He watched his father treat each of them with the same care, the same attention, the same willingness to get the fit right, regardless of what was being spent. He absorbed, without knowing he was absorbing anything, a set of values that would take him 30 years to fully surface as a business philosophy, that quality and affordability were not enemies of each other, that serving ordinary people well was a complete ambition rather than a lesser one, and that the true measure of a garment was whether the person wearing it felt better than they had before they put it on. He left Ube for Tokyo to attend Waseda University, one of Japan's most competitive private institutions, where he studied economics and political science. He was not, by his own later admission, a devoted student. He spent considerable time at the mahjong table and in the company of friends rather than in the library. He graduated in 1971 with a degree that shaped his analytical approach to business, but gave him none of the fashion industry connections, the design training, or the retail network that executives of comparable companies typically carried into their careers. What he had instead was an inherited understanding of how commerce actually felt at the level of the individual transaction, what it meant to earn a sale and what it meant to lose one, and why the difference mattered. He took a job at a Yusko department store in Tokyo, rotating through kitchenware and then the men's clothing floor, learning the mechanics of large-scale retail from ground level. He found it suffocating in the specific way that large bureaucratic organizations suffocate people who think in outcomes rather than processes. Decisions move slowly through layers of consensus. The customer felt remote from the people making choices about what to put in front of them. He lasted 9 months. He quit and went home to Ube. What happened next would take 3 decades, 2 expensive international failures, and 1 genuinely accidental brand name to resolve into something coherent. The tailor's son from Ube would eventually become the richest person in Japan, his net worth ultimately exceeding $50 billion. He would build a clothing company operating over 2,500 stores across more than 25 countries. He would develop fabric technologies licensed to no competitor on Earth. He would outlast and outsell companies that began with more capital, more history, and more industry connections than he ever possessed. His name is Tadashi Yanai. The company he built, beginning with a clerical error that became a brand identity, is called Uniqlo. When Yanai joined Ogori Shoji in 1972, it was a modest regional menswear chain, a handful of shops in Western Japan, known locally and invisible everywhere else. His father had built it carefully over 2 decades, adding locations slowly, staying within what he understood. Yanai arrived at 23 with the impatience of someone who had just spent time in Tokyo and came home with expectations the existing operation had never been designed to meet. He moved quickly. He demanded more. He criticized where things fell short and offered little cushioning around the feedback. Within 2 years, most of the staff had resigned. They found him arrogant, difficult, impossible to satisfy. He later said they were entirely right. He said it with the specific candor of someone who had spent years sitting with the memory, rather than rationalizing it away. The experience of watching a team leave because of his own behavior became a permanent corrective in his thinking, a reminder he carried consciously for the rest of his career, that being certain you are right and actually being right are not the same thing, and that a leader who cannot see the difference will always be surrounded by people too afraid or too exhausted to tell him the truth. The following decade was one of deliberate study. He traveled to the United States multiple times and spent real time observing how American specialty retail worked from the inside. He examined how the Gap had built a wardrobe brand at scale without sacrificing its core proposition. He studied how category specialists had discovered that consumers would trade variety for consistency if the consistency was reliable enough. He read deeply about vertical integration and supply chain control. He was building toward a question he could not yet fully articulate, something about the relationship between manufacturing quality and accessible pricing, something about whether those two things actually had to exist in permanent tension, something about what retail could look like if the customer's daily life, rather than the industry's seasonal calendar, was the organizing principle. What Yanai found during his years of American retail study was something deceptively simple, but operationally difficult. The brands that endured were the ones that had a reason to exist beyond the products they happened to sell. The Gap sold a version of American democratic confidence. LL Bean sold a particular relationship to outdoor reliability. Nordstrom sold the proposition that service could itself be the differentiator. Each of these companies had a story before it had a product line, or at least the two had developed together in a way that made them inseparable. Uniqlo, Yanai could see, would need the same thing. It would need a reason to exist that was not simply, we sell clothes at a reasonable price. Every budget retailer in Japan could claim that. He needed something harder to copy. By 1984, Yanai had assumed the presidency of Ogori Shoji. On June 2nd of that year, he opened a new kind of store in the Fukuromachi district of Hiroshima. He intended to call it Unique Clothing Warehouse, abbreviated to Uniqlo for Hong Kong registration purposes. The licensing agent who processed the paperwork misread the letter C as a Q. The name came back as Uniqlo. Yanai looked at the mistake, decided it sounded better than the original, and kept it. The brand that would eventually clothe hundreds of millions of people was named by an error that no one caught in time. The concept of the Hiroshima store was structurally different from anything else in the Japanese retail landscape at the time. No seasonal collections rotating what was acceptable on a fashion industry schedule. No trend reports. No editorial voice instructing customers about what they should want this season and feel embarrassed about next season. Just well-made basics, trousers, shirts, sweaters, jackets, cut cleanly and built to last, at prices so accessible that a university student and a retired school teacher could walk through the same door without either feeling they were in the wrong place. The store was full from day one. Word spread the way it always spreads when something is genuinely useful, quietly, person to person, without a campaign. Yanai expanded steadily through the late 80s and early 90s, adding locations as real demand supported them rather than ahead of it. In 1991, he renamed the parent company Fast Retailing, a signal of intent, positioning the business not as a heritage brand or a luxury proposition, but as something practical, forward-moving, and built for the everyday present. By the mid-90s, Uniqlo had hundreds of locations across Japan and was consistently profitable. It was useful without being exciting. The store you went to when you needed something that worked, not the store you sought out when you wanted to feel a particular way. Then 1998 arrived, and a fleece jacket changed the entire trajectory of the company. The domestic success of the 90s had, paradoxically, created a new kind of problem. When Uniqlo was a regional chain, the constraints of geography kept the operation legible. When it became a national brand with hundreds of locations, the distance between Yanai's vision and what was actually happening in stores on a given Tuesday became much larger. Quality consistency is easy to achieve in 10 stores and genuinely difficult to maintain across 300. Yanai became obsessed with the systems question. How do you ensure that every customer, in every location, on every day, receives a version of what the brand promises? The answer he reached for was standardization. At the operational level, combined with genuine distinctiveness at the product level. Control the process tightly, invest the freed-up attention in making the product itself exceptional. It was the manufacturing logic of Toyota applied to retail, and it was specifically Japanese in a way that would later become legible as a competitive advantage when Uniqlo returned to international markets. Fleece jackets in Japan in the late 90s were marketed as outdoor performance gear. Premium brands like Patagonia charged the equivalent of $80 to $100. The category carried aspirational associations, hiking, nature, an active and implicitly affluent lifestyle that kept prices elevated by implication even for consumers who had no intention of going anywhere near a mountain. Yanai and his team studied the market and made a decision that required genuine nerve. They manufactured a well-constructed fleece jacket and priced it at 1,900 yen, about $15, not as a promotional loss leader, as the actual sustainable price point, not a cheap-looking fleece, not a garment that broadcast its discount with every fiber. The Uniqlo fleece came in 15 colors. It was soft, warm, and durable in ways that garments costing 5 times more were not always guaranteed to be. It was better than its price implied, which is the specific formula for the kind of commercial surprise that turns a functional retailer into a cultural conversation. In 1998, Uniqlo sold 2 million of the jackets. In 1999, 8.5 million. In the year 2000, 26 million fleece jackets left Uniqlo stores across Japan. Queues formed before opening time on days when new color stock arrived. National newspapers ran feature stories analyzing what was happening. Television programs debated whether the Uniqlo fleece was a fashion phenomenon or a sociological one. The answer turned out to be neither. It was something more interesting. It was proof that a product could earn genuine public devotion simply by doing exactly what it promised, at a price that did not require consumers to feel clever or virtuous about paying it. The fleece campaign transformed the company's economics. 26 million units in a single year is transformative by any measure. It simultaneously transformed what Uniqlo meant in the cultural imagination. Before 1998, Uniqlo was the utilitarian choice you slightly apologize for. After 1998, it was the brand that had understood something the rest of the industry was too invested in its own mythology to see, that most consumers, when stripped of social pressure to perform their taste, mostly wanted clothes that fit well and did not fall apart. The campaign had not created that desire. It had satisfied it, loudly enough that the whole country noticed. In November 1998, Uniqlo opened its first Tokyo store in Harajuku, the neighborhood that functions as Japan's cultural weather station for retail. Fast retailing went public. The stock surged. Yanai appeared in business profiles. He had built, in under 20 years, one of the most discussed retail brands in Japan. And then, success did what success so often does. It made him confident in exactly the wrong direction at exactly the wrong moment. He decided it was time to take Uniqlo to the world. The first international store opened in London in 2001, then another, then another. By 2002, there were 21 Uniqlo locations in and around the British capital, and Yanai was expanding with the certainty of someone who had just watched an entire country fall in love with his concept and could not imagine why that love would not travel. The formula was simple, and it had worked. Quality basics at honest prices. Surely that was universal. Surely that was exactly what the world's consumers had been waiting for. London was not hostile. It was something more deflating, indifferent. The stores opened. Consumers came once, looked around the racks, and mostly did not return. The problems were multiple and intersecting. The sizing had been calibrated for Japanese bodies and scaled up for European frames in a way that the company would later admit was careless. Proportions off in ways that were difficult to name precisely, but felt immediately when you tried something on. The marketing offered no local context, no story, no reason embedded in the brand's presentation for why a British consumer should feel anything about this Japanese company that had materialized on their high street without explanation or apparent purpose. The deeper problem was one Yanai had never needed to solve in Japan. Inside Japan, the fleece campaign had done the work of meaning-making. The brand already meant something. Millions of people already understood what Uniqlo was for. Outside Japan, there was no campaign and no inherited meaning. There was just a building full of folded basics asking consumers to care about it without giving them a sufficient reason to do so. By 2004, most of the UK stores had closed. Of approximately 50 locations eventually opened in that first British push, all but a handful were shuttered within 4 years. The losses ran into the tens of millions of dollars, some of it Yanai's personally. He had not been a passive investor in the expansion. He had architected it. In 2005, 3 stores opened in New Jersey shopping malls targeting the New York metropolitan area. They closed inside a year. American mall retail required fluency in a specific emotional vocabulary. How to position against Gap and Abercrombie and Express. How to proportion garments for American bodies. How to create the atmospheric feeling that made a shopper choose one store over the one 30 meters away. Uniqlo arrived without that knowledge and without a plan to acquire it before opening day. The gap years between the London collapse and the second attempt, approximately from 2004 to 2007, were the period in which the company's philosophy solidified into something actionable. Yanai hired designers and product developers who thought about function first and appearance second. He deepened the Tailor partnership and pushed for materials that solved problems consumers had learned to accept as inevitable. The thermal underlayer that added visible bulk, the puffer jacket that could not be carried in a bag, the dress shirt that required ironing after every wash. Each of these accepted inconveniences became a research brief. Each brief eventually became a product. The discipline of the process, identifying a real human problem, commissioning scientific research to address it, and then pricing the result accessibly, was invisible to consumers who simply experienced it as a brand that consistently surprised them by working better than expected. That surprise, accumulated across dozens of products over many years, was the foundation on which the second international expansion was built. Standing in the wreckage of his first international strategy, tens of millions of dollars lighter, His global ambitions publicly humiliated in the two most visible Western markets, Yanai made the decision that would define his legacy more than any product launch or revenue milestone. He could have retreated. He could have declared Uniqlo a Japanese brand for Japanese people and ceded the rest of the world to Zara and H&M. Many executives confronting that scale of public and expensive failure would have found ways to rationalize exactly that conclusion. He did not. Instead, he spent years asking himself the question he had never needed to ask before. What, actually, is Uniqlo for? The answer was not a rebrand or a marketing pivot. It was a genuine philosophical position he named LifeWear. The argument was this: clothing should improve your daily life, not make you fashionable, not communicate your income or your cultural affiliations. Improve your actual experience of being alive, keep you warm without bulk, keep you cool without discomfort, let you move freely, and survive years of daily use without performance degradation. Clothing as technology for living, with fabric as its medium. Function as the design brief, not aesthetics. The reframing had structural consequences. If Uniqlo was in the life improvement business rather than the fashion business, its competitive advantage could not come from trend speed or seasonal novelty, the currencies that Zara and H&M had spent decades mastering. It had to come from somewhere more durable, from the quality of the materials themselves, from genuine research into what fabric could actually do, from the kind of value that did not expire when the season changed. In 2003, Fast Retailing and Tailor Industries, one of Japan's most advanced materials science companies, formalized a research partnership that was unusual in the apparel industry. Most clothing retailers sourced textiles from commodity suppliers, treating fabric as a raw material to be processed into product. Uniqlo and Tailor set out to create materials that did not yet exist, engineered from first principles around specific human needs. Materials mattered. The first major product of this collaboration was heat tech. The engineering challenge was precise. How do you keep a body warm without adding bulk, without heavy insulation, without stiffness, without the layered feeling of traditional thermal garments? Tailor's scientists developed hollow fibers whose microscopic architecture trapped warm air while converting the body's own moisture output into additional heat. The fabric was thin enough to wear under a dress shirt and forget about. It was warm enough to matter on a cold morning in ways that competing products at the same price point were not. Heat tech launched in 2003 at prices accessible to ordinary people who needed warmth, not performance wear enthusiasts willing to pay a premium for it. By the time cumulative sales were counted across the following 2 decades, Uniqlo had sold more than 1.5 billion heat tech items worldwide. 1.5 billion. The product carries no designer's name, no celebrity endorsement, no seasonal campaign with a theme and a location shoot. It sits on the shelf next to the socks and the trousers, and people reach for it because it works, which was always the entirety of the proposition. The Tailor partnership continued to produce. AIrism followed, ultra-fine fibers engineered for moisture management in warm weather, creating a cooling sensation against the skin that had no equivalent at the same price point. Ultralight down came next, a puffer jacket so compressible it folded into its own breast pocket and weighed almost nothing, solving the warmth without bulk problem in a completely different direction than heat tech had. Stretch fabrics arrived for trousers, wrinkle-resistant shirts for travelers. Each new material extended a proprietary library that no competitor could simply license from a shared supplier, because the research had taken years and was jointly owned and could not be replicated by studying the finished garment. Proprietary advantage grew, while Zara tracked runway shows and got imitation versions into stores within 2 weeks. And while H&M generated seasonal excitement through celebrity collaborations and limited designer capsules, Uniqlo was going deeper into the chemistry of fiber. It was a fundamentally different bet about where lasting value in clothing came from. Zara bet on novelty. H&M bet on accessibility plus trend. Uniqlo bet on material performance. The bet was slower to pay off in visible ways. It required patience, and patience in a publicly traded company is genuinely hard to sustain when shareholders are watching quarterly numbers and expecting movement. The competitive contrast that defined Uniqlo's position in the global market by the 2010s was not simply price or quality, but something more specific: the nature of the investment. Zara invested in speed and trend intelligence. H&M invested in brand partnerships and accessible glamour. Uniqlo invested in research and development partnerships that took years to yield results and could not be easily replicated by watching what the competition was doing. The timeline mattered. A competitor could copy a Uniqlo design in weeks. It could not copy the fiber engineering behind heat tech in years. By choosing to compete on terrain that rewarded patience and punished imitation, Yanai had selected for a kind of competitive moat that the industry's dominant players, structured around speed and novelty, were not equipped to dig. It was, in retrospect, obvious. At the time, Uniqlo was a mid-sized Japanese retailer, with a string of international failures behind it. Nothing about it was obvious at all. Armed with this philosophy and a genuine product story that could cross cultural borders without losing its meaning, Uniqlo returned to Europe in 2007. The London flagship on Oxford Street was architecturally considered in ways the earlier stores had not been. It was a retail space that made a visible, deliberate statement, rather than asking customers to guess at the brand's intentions. Paris opened the same year. Both stores presented LifeWear as a worldview, clothing designed around real human needs rather than manufactured desire. They worked. Queues on opening day in both cities. Critics who had confidently dismissed Uniqlo after the 2001 failure were revising their assessments with the reluctant precision of people who had been publicly wrong about something they had called with certainty. Singapore followed in 2009, Taiwan in October 2010, Malaysia in November 2010, Thailand, the Philippines, and Australia in 2011. And in October 2011, a 5-story global flagship opened on Fifth Avenue in New York City, a block from Saks Fifth Avenue, in the most visible retail corridor in the Western world, not the New Jersey Mall version from 2005. A statement, a company standing in the most expensive retail address on earth and declaring, without apology, what it was. The Fifth Avenue store performed. The Soho location that followed became a destination. American consumers who discovered heat tech in their first Uniqlo winter became the kind of converts who told other people about it unprompted. Not because the brand was fashionable in any industry-approved sense, but because the product had done exactly what it promised. That particular transmission, that it actually works, was the one Yanai had been trying to earn since he first walked into a foreign market. Through all of it, Yanai remained an unusual figure by the standards of modern business celebrity. He did not cultivate a public persona. He did not seek keynote invitations or produce aspirational content for business media. He ran the company. He was known inside fast retailing for standards that employees found demanding to the point of intimidating, for feedback delivered without softening, and for complete intolerance of the comfortable institutional fiction that grows inside large organizations when people stop being honest with each other. He wrote a book in 2003 called 1 Win, 9 Losses. the title itself a rejection of the triumphalist mythology that surrounds most business success stories. The philosophy embedded in those 4 words was literal. Expect to fail far more than you succeed. What matters is whether you keep going. "I might look successful," he said in one interview, "but I've made many mistakes. People take their failures too seriously. You have to be positive and believe you will find success next time." The failures he referenced were not abstract. London had cost tens of millions. New Jersey had been expensive and public. The early domestic expansion had included periods of genuine financial stress. He was not speaking from comfortable retrospect. He was speaking from the direct experience of failures that were real, documented, and paid for in actual money. Failures he had treated as diagnostics rather than verdicts. He also said in a separate interview, "Whether it's tech or fashion, it must be for the customer." In an industry organized primarily around the validation of editors, buyers, and cultural gatekeepers, this sounds obvious and is actually a radical reorientation. Most fashion brands are, at their operational core, for the system that legitimizes them. The customer is downstream of a long chain of gatekeeping. Yanai was describing the orientation his father had practiced from a single shop in Ubi, making things for people who would actually wear them, pricing them fairly, earning the transaction every time, rather than manufacturing the desire to make it. By 2024, fast retailing's annual revenue had crossed 2 trillion yen. Uniqlo operated over 2,500 stores worldwide. The company was the 3rd largest apparel retailer in the world by revenue, behind Inditex and H&M. Tadashi Yanai's personal fortune exceeded $50 billion. He was the richest person in Japan, richer than industrial heirs, richer than technology founders, and richer than anyone in the country who had not built something from near nothing and kept building through the failures that could have stopped it. What he had built was a paradox in the most productive sense. A global fashion empire founded on the explicit premise that fashion, as the industry understood it, as a system of seasonal novelty and manufactured obsolescence, was largely beside the point. Uniqlo had not won by becoming a better Zara. It had won by becoming something Zara was not structured to be, a company that invested in the material properties of fabric rather than the aesthetic properties of design, that competed on chemistry and fiber science rather than trend forecasting, and that bet at every critical juncture on the durability of utility over the shorter life cycle of excitement. The industry had spent 40 years expecting Uniqlo to become something flashier, something with runway shows and creative directors and editorial relationships and the whole apparatus of fashion credibility. Yanai spent those same 40 years building something else, a company whose garments people reach for every morning the way they reach for good tools, without ceremony and without much thought, because the things simply worked and went on working season after season. Inside Japan, the Uniqlo story was about something the rest of the world would come to appreciate later: the democratization of genuine quality. For most of the history of clothing retail, the choice available to ordinary consumers was between fashionable and affordable. You could have clothes that were on trend, or you could have clothes that did not strain your budget. Getting both required either luck, a sale, or a good vintage find, or access to the kind of insider knowledge about where quality was hidden at low prices that only certain shoppers possessed. Yanai had grown up watching his father provide both. The shop in Ube had never been cheap in the apologetic sense. It had been fair, which is different. What Uniqlo did, at scale, was industrialize that fairness. It took the tailor's son's inherited conviction that ordinary people deserve clothes that genuinely worked, and built the supply chain, the material science partnerships, and the operational discipline to deliver it to millions of people simultaneously in stores from Tokyo to New York to Paris to Shanghai. In Ube, Hitoshi Yanai's original tailoring shop is long gone. The coal industry that defined the city through his working life closed decades ago. The city is quieter now than it was in 1949. But what Hitoshi was doing from that ground floor storefront, fitting real people into clothes that worked, charging what was fair, returning genuine value in every transaction, turned out not to be a small city proposition limited by its starting address. His son took it to $50 billion and 2,500 stores, and the third largest share of the global clothing market. He failed many times getting there. He failed in London. He failed in New Jersey. He failed early with the people his father had employed and had to rebuild his understanding of leadership from the ground up. He failed and rebuilt and returned every time, asking not who was to blame, but what needed to change, and then actually making the change. He held, through all of it, to the question his father had answered every working day with a measuring tape and a fair price in a modest shop in Yamaguchi Prefecture. What does this person actually need, and can I give it to them well? The tailor's son from Ube did not conquer fashion. He did something harder. He changed what it was supposed to be for